This is a test.
This is only a test, because had this been a real test, you would be given proper measures of density and gravity readings, which we're probably not going to end up doing. So, here's what we're going to do today. A lot of people have asked me, so what happens if I don't mix up my mead so good?
That's a good question. Let's find out.
Yeah, because I have no idea. So we're calling this a step feed dump mead. Sounds a little silly, but it actually kind of makes sense when you think about what we're doing here. So, some things that we're going to introduce to this mead. Raisins. Why? Because I like them and they work. They add a little color, they add a little flavor, they add a little sweetness. And hey, you know, why not? It makes people all kinds of crazy, so I like to do it. So how much am I gonna add?
Well, aren't we gonna start with the honey first?
No, I'm putting in all the other stuff first.
Okay.
This is an oddball, experimental type of thing, and I'm doing it different. How much raisins? 42. It's my story, I'm sticking to it. It's like 2 tablespoons, 3 tablespoons, not a big deal. To that, I'm gonna be adding some citrus zest. This happens to be Rangpur Lime Zest, which is a lot like a mandarin orange, so it's kind of like an orange zest. If you were using fresh, you might want to use like half a lemon or so. I'm gonna put in a couple of good pinches, which is probably like a teaspoon and a half. Let's call it 2 teaspoons. Get this stuff out of the way. Now, because this is going to be a mead, we need to add some honey. And I'm going to be using just sweet squeeze honey that we can get from Amazon pretty easily. The type of honey is not all that important for this particular brew because this is an experiment. So use the honey you like. It's going to be more or less a traditional, flavored with a little bit of raisin, but that's the gist. And what I'm going to do is add 1 pound of this honey. While Derica grabs the yeast, I want to point out this honey has partially crystallized, so there's little chunks coming out. It's totally okay. Honey crystallizes all on its own. It's really not a problem. It's not anything to worry about. Once I add the water back in, it'll be just fine. All right, so I have my 1 pound of honey in here. In case I didn't mention, that's how much we're using. Now, the reason I'm using 1 pound to start with is this is going to be a step feed. What that means is we'll add more honey in increments over time. But this is also a dump mead, which means I'm not mixing it. So it's gonna be harder on the yeast, and I don't wanna make it impossible on the yeast. I just want it to be hard on the yeast. I don't really want it to be hard on the yeast, it's just a joke. Now, because honey does need a little bit to get going, and I wanna give this a good chance, I'm going to be using Fermade O. I have here 2 grams diluted in water. And it goes. Notice, not mixing. And then, we need water. So I'm taking 1 gallon of water, and very unceremoniously pouring it in. Now I am pouring it this way on purpose because I'm not mixing. But we want aeration because we're starting up a fermentation. So I'm doing the high pour tea trick. How high can I go? Getting dangerous. Okay. I can only imagine what Derica's face looked like through all that. And then on top of that, I have a whole packet of Lalvin EC 1118 yeast. I know in the past I have showed disdain for this particular product. However, for a step feed mead that is going to be under difficult conditions, I think this is probably the best one. And we've had really good results with it. So I don't hate it as much as I used to. I don't hate it at all, actually. It's a perfectly fine yeast. There's nothing wrong with it. But it shouldn't be as ubiquitous as it sometimes is in recipes. That's my story and I'm sticking to it. So I'm just gonna dump it in. Now, before someone asks, no, we're not taking a gravity reading. Why? It's not mixed. It wouldn't mean anything. But I can guess this is probably somewhere around a 1.030 to 1.035 gravity. And that's okay. Because what's gonna really matter is the reading that's gonna happen in about 2 weeks. When this goes dry, we add more honey. And then that goes dry, we add more honey until we finally get to a balance point where it doesn't go dry anymore, but there's just enough sweetness for what we want it to taste like. But for now, we're gonna put the lid and airlock on this. We got the lid and airlock on here. Now I'm using a 1.4 gallon fermenter on purpose because I know I'm going to be adding volume to this with the honey. So I want to make sure there's enough room. And I know I said I wasn't going to mix it, but I'm just going to do that. That's the mixing I'm going to do. No swirls, no nothing. That was just to get the yeast in there because
it's in there.
It's like a blob.
It's in there.
Yeah, it's like a blob.
You gotta stop messing with it or you're gonna ruin your concept.
There's no way that amount of mixing did anything. I mean, there's still honey stuck to the sides of the fermenter, okay? So, we're gonna let this go for a while. Probably show you what this looks like in a day or two, because I don't think this is gonna start up as quickly as our usual brews. So we'll see you then. Okay, so this is day 2 of fermentation. We just haven't had a chance to show before this. But after about 24 hours, I checked it and it was bubbling. So fermentation will definitely find a way. Nature will almost always find a way. But I mean, it's bubbling at a pretty decent rate. We have a little bit of croissant showing inside. Something I want to be very, very, very clear about is I have not done the swirl method. I have not shaken this in any way. Just a little bit of movement is all the shaking it's got, and I've been trying to really be careful with that. Inside, I can see some of the raisins have plumped up a little bit. We have a little bit of a croissant line starting to form. It does look like there's some little bubbles coming up the sides. And when you get to the bottom, you don't really see any honey. It's as if it just either went into the solution, which I know will happen too, or maybe the yeast found most of it, which it is possible. It was a pretty low amount. I mean, we only did 1 pound in a gallon. So the original gravity is something in the 1.030 to 1.035 range. It's not very high at all. So I don't expect this to take more than, say, a week to 10 days or so to ferment fully. So we'll be back in a week with the next installment of this series showing you how to step feed our dump mead. Until then, as always, thanks so much for watching and have a great day.
This is a test.
This is only a test. Did you look at the thing or the camera?
I looked at the lens.
Okay, good. This is only a test, because had this been a real test, you would be given proper measures of density and gravity readings, which we're probably not going to end up doing. So, here's what we're going to do today.